October 4th, 1943, Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. The oak-paneled conference room went quiet as Reich Marshal Hermann Göring gave his verdict to Germany's aircraft makers. Every word got scribbled down by stenographers. What they captured turned out to be one of history's worst misjudgments. The Americans can't build airplanes. They're good with refrigerators and razor blades. Out the tall windows, the industrialists could see smoke curling up from Berlin's factories. Inside, workers scrambled to make up for Luftwaffe losses. The Third Reich was on the back foot after defeats in Stalingrad and North Africa, but it still ruled most of Europe. Göring, stuck in his old views from the 1920s, still pictured the US as a country full of jazz musicians and businessmen, great at churning out consumer goods, clueless when it came to weapons. What Göring didn't realize, at that exact moment, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships every single day. By the time his meeting wrapped up, the Richmond yards would have finished another one. 6 months later, those same Americans, supposedly hopeless at airplanes, would send 1,000 bombers over Germany in a day, while back home, shipyards rolled out a new cargo ship every 8 hours. German defeat wasn't just decided on the battlefield. It was written into production numbers, numbers that exposed just how wrong Nazi strategy was at its core. Göring's blind spot about American industry ran deep. As a World War I ace, he'd seen the US show up late, with barely any planes of their own, forced to fly French and British models. That memory stuck. It fed his fatal assumption about what Americans could do. He clung to it too. Whenever anyone worried about America, Göring would just shrug. In 1940, right after France fell, he told Hitler, "The Americans are good at making fancy cars and refrigerators, but that doesn't mean they're any good at making aircraft. They're bluffing. They're excellent at bluffing." It wasn't just Göring. German intelligence kept underestimating America. In November 1941, Oskar von Beulwitz, head of Luftwaffe intelligence, wrote a report saying US factories couldn't turn out more than 400 planes a month. He figured they didn't have the right tools or skilled workers. German naval intelligence didn't think much of them either. In January 1942, Kapitän zur See M.A. Maas reported to Admiral Raeder that American shipyards might manage 1 cargo ship per week. Their workers are soft, he wrote, used to high wages and short hours. They don't have German discipline. Even Hitler, who liked to mock America in public, wasn't fooled in private. He told his generals in December 1941, "We have to beat Russia fast. Once that's done, we can deal with America before their production swamps us." But Göring, the guy in charge of judging enemy air strength, just kept insisting the US was weak. While Göring repeated his old lines, America was turning into what FDR called the arsenal of democracy. On January 6, 1942, Roosevelt laid out jaw-dropping production goals in his State of the Union speech. First, to boost our airplane output so fast that in 1942 we'll build 60,000 planes, and we'll keep ramping up so that in 1943 we'll make 125,000, including 100,000 combat planes. German spies picked up these numbers. On January 8, 1942, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, "The Führer laughed when I showed him Roosevelt's production targets. Pure propaganda. If they build 1/10 of that, it'll be a miracle." What the Germans missed was that America had already started gearing up back in 1940. The groundwork wasn't laid by generals, but by British gold. The British Purchasing Commission, desperate to replace ships lost to U-boats, turned to US industrialist Henry J. Kaiser with a bold plan: build 60 cargo ships using mass production techniques no one had ever tried in shipbuilding. Kaiser had never built a ship before. He just finished the Hoover Dam ahead of schedule, but he took the job. His approach didn't just flip shipbuilding on its head, it changed the whole idea of wartime production. Kaiser changed shipbuilding from an old craft into something out of a factory. Instead of shipwrights shaping every beam by hand, his teams used prefabricated parts and welded them together on assembly lines, just like car makers did. The Liberty ship design wasn't fancy or high-tech. It was a 441-foot cargo ship, copied from an old British model and powered by a triple expansion steam engine. Nothing complicated, and any good mechanic could keep it running. When German intelligence got their hands on the specs after one of these ships was sunk in early 1942, they just laughed. To them it looked primitive. Corvetan Kapitan Peter Khmer wrote, "These ships are coffins, slow, ungainly, with the sailing characteristics of a brick." But he missed the point. The real genius was in the simplicity. Every part was standard. Every big section was built in a separate factory somewhere in America, shipped out to one of 18 shipyards, and then fit together like some giant industrial puzzle. At first, the learning curve was brutal. Most workers had never even seen a ship before. But pretty soon, they were outpacing veteran German builders. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, took 244 days to build and launched on September 27, 1941. German naval intelligence took note. They figured at that pace, the U.S. could turn out maybe 50 ships a year. What they missed was how fast things were speeding up. The second ship only took 180 days. The 10th, 105 days. By January 1942, they were down to 70 days. Then Henry Kaiser made a wild promise. He said he'd build a ship in 10 days. The Germans called it propaganda. September 1942, Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation in Portland, while German U-boats went on a rampage, sinking 69,000 tons of Allied shipping that month. Kaiser's crew started work on the SS Joseph N. Teal at 12:01 a.m., September 13th. What happened next looked like a choreographed dance, all grit and muscle. 3 shifts working nonstop. Huge cranes swung 250-ton sections into place. Welders, many of them women who hadn't even touched a torch 6 months before, ran mile after mile of perfect welds. This crew was a mix of housewives, farmers, store clerks, all turned into shipbuilders in a matter of weeks. There was Wendy the welder, real name Janet Doyle, a former waitress who became one of the fastest welders on site. Tom Washington, a black sharecropper from Alabama, was now a master ship fitter. Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American, could outweld the Germans. 10 days after the keel was laid, at exactly 4:30 p.m. on September 23rd, the SS Joseph N. Teal slid into the Columbia River. German intelligence heard about it and shrugged. Admiral Karl Dönitz told his staff, "Even if it's true, it's just a stunt. They can't keep this up." But Kaiser wasn't done. "We can do it faster," he said. November 8th, 1942, just after midnight at Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in California, German forces were retreating from El Alamein, and American shipyard workers were about to smash what was left of German confidence. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary was laid, surrounded by hundreds of prefabricated sections, all lined up and ready to go. In a way, the whole ship was already finished, every piece built, tested, and waiting. Now it was just a matter of putting it all together. Kaiser picked his best for this job. Catherine Glasscock, once a schoolteacher, now a welder, laying down beads at 35 feet an hour, faster than most Germans could dream. Richmond Jones, a black former sharecropper, ran the main crane, placing 250-ton pieces with inch-perfect accuracy. Mary Pilosino, just 19 and Italian-American, led the electrical team, wiring 5 miles of cable in less than a day. The pace was unreal. 6 hours in, the hull plates were welded. After 18 hours, the sides were up. By the end of day one, you could see the shape of a ship. The deck house, with all its plumbing and wiring already done, was set in place. On day two, a single crane lift that would have taken German yards a week. On day three, the engine, a 2,500 horsepower steam beast, built and tested in Toledo, then shipped in pieces, was dropped in and installed within hours. On November 12th at 3:30 p.m., the SS Robert E. Peary launched 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after laying the keel. She displaced 245 tons and barely needed any extra work before heading out. What once seemed impossible had become just another day at the yard. The first solid reports hit Berlin in December 1942, Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, using those long-range Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors, snapped photographs that German intelligence just couldn't accept at first. The pictures showed dozens of Liberty ships under construction at single shipyards. Hedman Wilhelmies sat down, counted more than 200 ships going up in those aerial shots, and filed his report on December 15th, 1942. He warned, "If these numbers are right, American shipbuilding is 10 times what we thought." The higher-ups buried the report. Göring refused to admit he'd miscalculated. He brushed it off, telling his staff, "The photos are a trick. The Americans are showing us the same ships from different angles to fake mass production." But U-boat commanders saw what was happening out at sea. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Baten of U-521 reported in January 1943 that convoy HX-2222 had 47 merchant ships, all looking fresh off the dock. Standard types, clearly mass-produced. Where were they coming from? The answer was everywhere. 18 American shipyards were churning out Liberty ships. In Baltimore, the Bethlehem Fairfield Yard had 47,000 workers and launched a ship every 4 days. The California Shipbuilding Corporation finished one every 5. People who'd never even seen the ocean before were outpacing skilled German craftsmen. By March 1943, American yards were launching Liberty ships so fast the numbers just didn't make sense to the Germans. 3 ships hit the water every day. Admiral Donitz's staff did the math. U-boats would need to sink 1.3 million tons a month just to keep up. Their best month, back in November 1942, they managed 729,000 tons. They were already falling behind. Each Liberty ship needed 250,000 different parts. Just the hull took 30,000 pieces of steel, each cut to exact specs. The electrical system ran on 25 miles of wiring. There were 3,500 feet of piping, 2,500 valves, and 350 miles of welding. Still, by mid-1943, American workers were putting these ships together in about 42 days on average. The workforce itself turned Nazi racial ideas upside down. Out of 650,000 Americans building ships, 200,000 were women, Rosie the Riveters, proving gender didn't matter in industry. African Americans, dismissed by Nazi ideology, ran cranes and welded joints that outperformed German standards at Kaiser's Richmond yards. Integrated crews, unthinkable under Nazi rule, were launching a ship every 51 hours by May 1943. The diversity was wild. Chinese American welders next to Norwegian immigrants, Native American riveters from New Mexico working with Jewish refugees from Germany, Mexican American women supervising teams that included poor whites from Appalachia. This so-called inferior coalition was outproducing the German master race by margins nobody could have predicted. In 1943, Wolf's Lair, East Prussia, Admiral Dönitz stood in front of Hitler with grim news. Black May, as it became known, was a disaster for the U-boats. They lost 41 subs and only managed to sink 50 merchant ships. American shipyards were building new ships 3 times faster than the U-boats could sink them. Donitz's staff reported the Americans had launched 140 merchant ships last month. They'd sunk 41. At this pace, America would replace every ship lost since 1939 by the end of the year. Hitler turned to Göring, who seemed to shrink under the pressure. "You told me Americans could only make consumer goods," Hitler said quietly, his voice dangerous. Göring tried to dodge. "The ships are low quality, mein Führer. Yeah, they'll break up in storms." Hitler cut him off. "Your intelligence is worthless. The Americans are outproducing us in every area." And the numbers were brutal. American factories pumped out 8,000 aircraft a month. German output, even with Albert Speer's best efforts, peaked at 2,000. American tank production topped 2,000 a month. Germany hit 500. The Liberty ships were just the most visible sign of an industrial machine Germany couldn't hope to match. On October 4th, 1943, Göring was still in denial. He gave a speech to aircraft manufacturers clinging to old lines. "The Americans claim fantastic production figures, 8,000 aircraft a month. That's impossible. And even if it's true, the quality must be bad. Quantity without quality means nothing." But deep down, he knew the truth. Luftwaffe pilots were already saying American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts outclassed German fighters. B-17s and B-24s flew over Germany in 1,000-plane waves. Those inferior American planes were methodically destroying German cities. After the speech, General Adolf Galland confronted Göring directly. "Reich Marshal, I've seen the numbers for American production. They're building 54 engine bombers every single week. That's more than the total number of fighters we even have. You brushed off what they're capable of, and now the Reich is paying for it." Göring retreated to Karen Hall, his hunting estate sulking with all the art he'd stolen from across Europe. Honestly, the only people who really knew how powerful American industry was were the U-boat crews who faced it head-on. Captain Lieutenant Heinz Schaefer of U-977 wrote, "By late 1943, the convoys were enormous. 80, 90, sometimes 100 ships, most of them brand new and American-built. We might sink 1 or 2 if we were lucky, but it felt like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon. For every ship we took down, 3 more popped up on the horizon." Oberleutnant Zursee Herbert Werner, commander of U-415, probably put it best. Through their periscopes, they watched Liberty ships parade past, all painted fresh gray, covered in the scars of mass production, welded seams instead of rivets. The same deck gear, the same silhouette, endless lines of them, each convoy bigger than the last. The crews started to realize they weren't fighting ships. They were up against an entire industrial machine that replaced its losses faster than they could even record them. The psychological toll was brutal. The Americans announced ship launchings like they were baseball scores. After a while, German submarine crews just stopped counting. The numbers were too much. By January 1944, American production stats were practically a weapon themselves. German intelligence could only listen to the radio as the numbers rolled in. 1,238 Liberty ships completed in 1943, 203 improved Victory ships, 122 tankers, 367 military vessels. December alone saw 155 merchant ships launched, 8,189 aircraft delivered, 2,264 tanks finished, 153,000 trucks built. Wilhelm Zangen, head of the Reich Association of German Industry, reported to Hitler in February 1944, "The Americans are turning out 100,000 aircraft a year to our 25,000, 50,000 tanks to our 19,000, 2.5 million military vehicles to our 100,000, 2,500 merchant ships to our 200. He said flat out, "These ratios can't go on for another year." Hitler supposedly pitched the report into the fire, shouting, "Defeatist propaganda! But even those numbers were low. The real American output in 1944 went way beyond those estimates. The Japanese saw it too. Their naval attaché in Berlin, Commander Toshikazu Omi, cabled Tokyo in March 1944. German leaders keep underestimating American production. I've confirmed the Americans launched 173 ships in February alone. German officials refuse to believe it. Their denial is a danger to strategy. Recommend Imperial Navy assume American production is twice what the Germans estimate. The Japanese fighting in the Pacific didn't kid themselves. Admiral Yamamoto warned before Pearl Harbor. I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success. He understood what Göring never got once America ramped up. Its industrial capacity was almost limitless. June 6th, 1944, D-Day, the ultimate proof of American industry. German defenders looked out and saw an armada they couldn't even count. 6,939 vessels, hundreds of Liberty ships packed with supplies, vehicles, ammunition. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, commanding the 716th Infantry Division, reported, "The sea is black with ships. They stretched to the horizon everywhere you looked. This is not an invasion. It is a migration. Every Liberty ship out there was 42 days of American factory work. Every tank rolling onto the beach was one of 88,410 the U.S. made during the war. Every Jeep, one of 639,245. The landing craft, they came from places like Evansville, Indiana, and Quincy, Illinois, built by workers who'd never even seen the ocean." Obergefreiter Ernst Goth, defending Sword Beach, later wrote, "We'd been told Americans were soft, their soldiers would break, their equipment was junk, but I watched their engineers build a floating harbor in 5 days, bigger than most German ports. Their trucks climbed over our beach obstacles like mountain goats. Their so-called inferior fighters swept the Luftwaffe from the skies." Even as American bombs hammered Berlin in February 1945, Göring stuck to his fantasy. He told his staff, "American production figures are exaggerated. Most of these ships are probably wooden decoys for propaganda." His deputy General der Flieger Karl Koller wrote, "The Reich Marshal lives in a dream world. Yesterday, there's no American bombers destroyed Lohne. He still insists they can't have built so many planes. When I showed him the serial numbers from crashed bombers, evidence that at least 15,000 B-17s and B-24s had rolled out, he called me a defeatist. Honestly, the truth was even worse than he thought. By the end of the war, America had built 31,043 four-engine bombers, 18,482 B-24 Liberators, and 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. Just this single type of plane outpaced Germany's entire aircraft production during the war. When American forces captured the Reich Air Ministry in May 1945, they found Göring's intelligence files. Over and over, his own agents tried to warn him about American production, but Göring just scrawled unreliable or enemy propaganda in the margins. One report from June 1943 described a Panama shipyard where 17 Liberty ships were being built at the same time, with one finished every 3 days. Göring scribbled, "Impossible, agent compromised or insane." By December 1943, another agent reported the 1,000th Liberty ship completed. Göring wrote, "Propaganda. Actual number, probably less than 200. Later, Major William Hutchinson, who reviewed those files, summed it up. It was staggering to see how completely the German leadership had deluded themselves. They had accurate intelligence but refused to believe it because it contradicted their racial theories and pre-war assumptions. At Nuremberg in 1946, Göring finally had to face the numbers: 2,710 Liberty ships, 531 Victory ships, 296,429 aircraft, 88,410 tanks, 2,383, 311 military trucks. Göring tried to wave it away. These figures represent quantity, not quality. We Germans emphasized quality over quantity. Then prosecutor Robert Jackson showed him a captured German report from 1944, written by Göring's own staff, admitting that American planes beat theirs in every category: speed, range, armament, reliability. Göring went silent. Alone with psychiatrist Dr. Gustav Gilbert, he finally admitted, "I underestimated the Americans. I thought they were soft, spoiled by luxury. When I said they could only make consumer goods, I believed it. It was the greatest miscalculation of my life. They buried us under an avalanche of production." Germany's stubborn refusal to accept the truth about American industry proved fatal. Admiral Dönitz kept the U-boat campaign going long after it was mathematically hopeless. Out of 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 28,000 died, a 70% casualty rate, the highest of any service on any side during the war. They died trying to sink ships that were being replaced faster than they could be destroyed. The Luftwaffe, trusting Göring's claims about limited American aircraft, kept attacking when they should have switched to defense. The result? 43,000 Luftwaffe personnel died fighting a country that built 50 planes for every German one. Even the U-boats themselves tell the story. Germany built 162 U-boats. They sank almost 3,000 Allied ships, 175 warships, and 2,025 merchant ships. But the Allies built 5,777 merchant vessels. For every ship sunk, 2 more appeared. The math was unforgiving even when the marshals lied. Behind those Liberty ships stood 18 million Americans working in war production, more people than the entire German armed forces. The Richmond shipyards alone had 93,000 workers at their peak, more than all of Germany's shipbuilding industry put together. These workers came from everywhere, blowing apart Nazi ideas of race and hierarchy. Emma Martinez, a Mexican-American welder at Todd Houston Shipbuilding, laid down 300 feet of perfect welds per shift, a pace German welders rarely matched. Dorothy Luck, a housewife from Oakland, ran a crane hoisting 250-ton loads. Thomas Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama, became a shipfitter whose precision beat German standards. They worked in ways unimaginable in Nazi Germany, integrated cafeterias even in places where local laws said otherwise, childcare so mothers could work, free health clinics, wages at $1.20 an hour, more than German skilled workers earned in a day. They bought war bonds with the extra. German workers, on the other hand, faced execution if they slowed down. The contrast was sharp. Americans worked overtime for pride and pay. German factories leaned more and more on forced labor, people dragged in from conquered countries who sabotaged what they could. American workers' kids went to school. German teenagers got drafted to man anti-aircraft guns. Americans suggested ways to build faster. Germans who spoke up risked being shot for defeatism. Liberty ships showed off American innovation that Germany just couldn't match. Welding replaced riveting, cutting build time by 30% and shaving 600 tons of weight. Lincoln Electric Company's welding technique was so advanced that captured German engineers didn't believe it until they saw it firsthand. Prefabrication hit levels Germany never even approached. They built entire deck houses miles away from the shipyards, plumbing, wiring, furniture, everything already in place. Then they loaded these massive structures onto special rail cars and hauled them off, using cranes that could lift 250 tons, 5 times what the biggest German shipyard cranes could handle. The whole production system was a game changer. Henry Kaiser rolled out assembly lines so workers became experts in one job. Welders, for example, spent months perfecting the same joints, hitting speeds and precision that old-school methods couldn't touch. The learning curve was wild. People who'd never even seen a ship in July were outpacing experienced German shipbuilders by December. Building each Liberty ship took materials from all over the country, arriving with a timing that German logistics officers claimed was impossible. Steel plates from Pittsburgh showed up just when workers needed them. Engines from Toledo came in, tested and ready to go. Electrical generators from Schenectady landed right on schedule. The railroads behind all this? Unbelievable. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone moved 50 million tons of war supplies in 1943, more than Germany's whole rail system, and they did it while still running civilian passenger trains. After the war, Major Hans Keil, a German logistics officer, summed it up. We struggled to supply single factories. The Americans supplied entire industries. We counted boxcars. They counted train loads. We planned in weeks. They planned in years. Even as Liberty ships were rolling out, Americans kept improving. In 1944, the new Victory ships came faster, 15 to 17 knots instead of 11, bigger, more advanced, and still built almost as quickly, averaging 42 days per ship. New turbine engines, better hulls, improved ventilation, upgraded navigation. Every change made the ships better without slowing down production. Meanwhile, when Germany tried to roll out improved submarines with the Type 21 program, it was a disaster. Only 4 were operational by the war's end, while America cranked out 531 Victory ships in 18 months. Germany's efforts barely registered. The raw numbers are staggering. In 1941, America's GDP hit $126 billion. Germany's was $35 billion. American steel mills turned out 80 million tons. Germany managed 20 million. America generated 26 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, Germany just 8 billion. American production jumped 170% during the war. Germany managed only 30% only 30%, even with Speer's frantic efforts. By 1944, America was spending $90 billion a year on the war, more than Germany's entire pre-war economy. The Liberty ship program alone cost $4.6 billion, more than Germany spent on its whole U-boat fleet. After the war, Dr. Ralph Wagenfuhr, who ran German wartime statistics, ran the numbers. America outproduced Germany 6-1 in raw materials, 8-1 in finished goods, 12-1 in transportation. We weren't defeated, he said. We were buried. American production itself became a weapon. The Office of War Information sent out stats for German soldiers to hear: a ship every 8 hours, a plane every 5 minutes, a tank every 7. At first, they didn't believe it until they saw it with their own eyes. Gerhard Helmut Rohmer, who defended Normandy, remembered, "The Americans announced 10,000 planes for Invasion Day. We laughed. Then the sky turned black with aircraft. Everything we thought was propaganda turned out true. Everything our leaders told us was true turned out to be propaganda." Liberty ships became a symbol of American power. German propaganda tried to mock them as ugly ducklings, but the crews knew better. One captured submariner told his interrogators, "When convoys of 50, 60, 70 of these ships appeared, we knew the war was lost. Mathematics doesn't lie even when politicians do." After Germany surrendered, American investigators asked German industrial leaders what they'd really thought during the war. They all agreed Göring had blown it. Fritz Thyssen, a steel magnate who'd helped Hitler rise, said Göring lived in fantasy. He went to America in the 1920s, saw only speakeasies and jazz clubs, never the steel mills or auto plants. His ignorance cost Germany the war. Albert Speer was even harsher. Göring's dismissal of American production was criminal negligence. By the time I became armaments minister, it was too late. The Americans produced monthly what took us a year. The Liberty ships were just the visible tip of an industrial supremacy we couldn't hope to match. Even Alfred Krupp, whose factories were once the pride of German industry, admitted, "We made the best steel in the world in artisan quantities. The Americans made good steel in oceanic quantities. One Liberty ship had enough steel for 50 Tiger tanks. They cranked out 2,610 Liberty ships. We managed 1,347 Tiger tanks. The numbers speak for themselves. Even the Soviets, America's allies but hardly friends, were floored by what American factories could do. Liberty ships weren't just Britain's lifeline. They kept the Soviet war machine moving too. Marshal Zhukov spelled it out in his memoirs. The Americans gave us 400,000 trucks, 13,000 tanks, 15,000 aircraft, and 17 million tons of supplies. But what really stunned us were the Liberty ships themselves, hauling everything through Arctic waters, dodging German attacks. Every ship that made it to Murmansk felt like another win over the German submarines. Without those ships, we never would have reached Berlin. Nikita Khrushchev, running Ukrainian industry during the war, didn't sugarcoat it. Without American trucks, the artillery would have sat still. Without American steel, no tanks. Without American food, the Soviet army would have gone hungry. The Liberty ships brought everything: boots, telephone wire, spam. Göring sneering at American industry. That was a gift. Germany never grasped the force behind the Allied supply lines. Admiral Kuznetsov put it simply, "We lost plenty of ships to German U-boats in the Arctic convoys, but for every ship sunk, the Americans built 3 more. The Germans could sink them, Americans could make an ocean of them." The final scorecard tells the story. 2,710 Liberty ships, 18 shipyards. By 1943, a new ship every 42 days on average. The record? 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes, start to finish. Altogether, 29,292,000 tons of shipping, $1.8 million per ship. On average, total merchant ships built 5,077, more than all other nations combined. Shipyard workers peaked at 1.7 million. Women made up over a third. African Americans about 14%. Wages averaged $1.20 an hour. Now stack up production. The U.S. built 296,429 aircraft. Germany 111,767. U.S. tanks 88,410. German tanks 67,429. Trucks 2.3 million versus Germany's 350,000. Artillery, machine guns, ammunition, America just dwarfed the numbers. German U-boats, 162 built, 785 destroyed. They sank almost 3,000 Allied ships, but the Allies built almost 6,000. In the end, the net gain was around 3,000 ships. Liberty ships did more than just change the war. They changed America. Shipyards, though still segregated by local laws, became early models for civil rights. Women proved permanently they belonged in heavy industry. Kaiser's health care for workers turned into Kaiser Permanente, now serving millions. Liberty ship production methods, welding, prefabrication, assembly lines, revolutionized shipbuilding everywhere. The Japanese and Koreans ran with these ideas after the war, eventually outproducing the Americans with American-born techniques. Most of all, Liberty ships showed the world that democracy could outproduce dictatorships. Free workers beat slave labor. Diversity wasn't a weakness, it was strength. Roosevelt's vision of America as the arsenal of a democracy proved right. At Nuremberg, facing execution, Göring kept his aristocratic swagger, But reality had caught up with him. In his last statement, he didn't mention American industry at all. That silence was its own confession. Later that night, he killed himself with cyanide. Finally, the delusions were gone. Dr. Gustav Gilbert, the prison psychiatrist, wrote down Göring's last thoughts on American industry. I should have known. A country that built the Empire State Building in 410 days could build anything. But I bought into our own propaganda about American decadence. Those Liberty ships, they should have been called victory ships. They were our defeat, plain and simple. Today, two Liberty ships are still around, the SS John W. Brown and SS Jeremiah O'Brien. They're the last working witnesses to this massive industrial effort. When they pass the Statue of Liberty on memorial cruises, their whistles echo across the same waters where U-boats once hunted. It's a reminder of the time democracy stood up to those convinced it would fold. Commander Edward Ellsberg, who ran salvage ops at Normandy, nailed what Liberty ships meant. They were ugly, slow, and simple, but they were there. Thousands of them, carrying everything, Shermans and candy bars, ammo and blood plasma. They were the bridge from American factories to the front lines. Göring figured Americans could only make toasters and cars. He was wrong. We could make anything, including victory. The 2010 Liberty ships aren't just steel and rivets. They're proof of what happens when people underestimate democracy because of their own narrow-mindedness. Remember when Hermann Göring sneered at American industry, thinking all we could make were toasters and cars? That's got to be one of the biggest blunders in history. While he was busy believing his own propaganda, American workers were cranking out ships and weapons non-stop. The only real limit in the US was what we could imagine, not what we could build, and honestly, the only thing in short supply was anyone dumb enough to take us lightly. Liberty ships weren't just boats hauling cargo. Each one, 10,000 tons of American know-how, shouted that freedom, once it gets moving, can outpace tyranny so fast that even the cleverest generals can't keep up. These ships showed everyone that factories win wars just as much as soldiers do, and if you ignore the power of an industrial democracy because you buy into racist nonsense, well, you're basically signing your own defeat.